Welcome to the Right Boss Podcast, the show where the spotlight goes beyond fame and success.
We sit down with icons, celebrities, rising talents and business leaders from across the globe to uncover the stories you don't usually hear.
This isn't just about careers or achievements. It's about the personal journey, the struggles, the lessons, and the moments that shaped who they are today.
This is the Right Buzz Podcast.
Hey Patrick, welcome to the Right Boss Podcast, and I've been busy just reading, the amazing things that's going on with you, and it's going to be really interesting to find out a lot about what you've been up to from the start of your journey, how you got to the start of your journey. But first of all, before we do start, tell us a little bit about yourself, my friend.
Thank you, Wayne, and again, thank you for having us on. Really appreciate being here. So I've been in recovery for more than 4 decades, and I can talk a little bit about that, how I got here. I grew up in a working class family, pretty typical. We clothes shopping for school. We never got new clothes. We went to secondhand stores, which is fine. All my friends did too. But very early on, I found alcohol and drugs as a way to cope with difficult feelings and difficult situations. And, a drink or two made it easier to go ask a pretty girl to go dance, right? When I didn't necessarily have the courage for it otherwise. So I went in the Marine Corps, and the Marine Corps sent me to treatment, which is not something they normally do. Back in 79, it didn't take, but when I got in trouble and things got bad, I knew where to go. So I think one of the things I talk about a lot is I compare the recovery pattern. Like when I speak at a speaker meeting, the pattern is what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, which kind of jumping out of my story a little bit, but I think it parallels traditional cultures and rites of passage in that, there's separation, there's that liminal state where you're kind of in between, you're not an adult, you're not a child, not an adult yet. And then there's reincorporation. And it really does parallel recovery, especially early recovery, that liminal state where you're stepping out of the old life. And it's very difficult, very challenging. And I think all of us in recovery have walked through that. One of the things that helps us in recovery and helps us in traditional rites of passages is the elders who have walked this path before, kind of guard that liminal state, guard that vulnerable transitional place that we're all in, show us the right path, show us how to move forward. And so I think for many of us, and for me, that liminal state, that crucible moment for me was the night my daughter was born. I was pulled over and I was in a holding cell. And so I missed it. And in 1983, it wasn't as common to have those tests where you knew it was going to be a little girl or a little boy. I didn't know. So I missed it. And for me, that was kind of the moment. Didn't figure it out right away, but 7 months later, my wife then, my ex-wife, said, "You're going to have to make some decisions here. You can't keep living here and living this way," right?
Yeah.
So I talked to my folks. They essentially said, "We love you, but you can't stay here like this." And I really was running out of soft places to land. So I went to a meeting, and it was at the church my mom worked at, and a little farming community in southern Wisconsin. And I walked in the room, and I knew everybody in the room, right? And there's always kind of this moment where you go, "Oh, crap. Now they all know," right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they didn't already know. There wasn't a bar I could go into in town. I was so obnoxious, they wouldn't even take my money. So it went pretty well. I went a couple of months. I fell down hard. And, one of the things I'm really grateful for is my daughter was so young that she doesn't remember ever seeing her dad loaded. Um, and I had the great honor and great privilege many years later of being a single dad from the time she was 12 to the time she was 18. And every time I start talking about her, I start popping buttons off my chest. I'm so proud of her. She's brilliant. She is just brilliant. And I'm so blessed and so fortunate. So I think my experience has helped me as a counselor. Um, Now, I'll make this real clear. What I did as a drug and alcohol counselor, and I'm going to be fully retired next week.
Yeah.
I'm excited about that, but I'm actually busier now than I was when I was at work, which is fantastic. I'm writing all day long. But one of the things that I think I have some insight to is I understand what this process is like. And it's different for everybody. We all have different paths to recovery.
Of course.
None of us are the same. And I think there's a real famous quote by Carl Jung, and I've spent a lot of time with Carl, and I really admire his work. And I'm going to read that quickly. Every
Sure.
transformation demands as its precondition the ending of a world, the collapse of an old philosophy of life, right? So I think that applies so much to recovery in that I don't have to change one thing. I've got to change everything, the way I see the world, the way I see myself, and so on. So I'm so grateful and thankful for this moment. So that's a little bit about me. Um, and I kind of before I got into being a certified counselor, I worked at a treatment center as staff,
Yeah.
and I learned so much working up close and personal with a lot of the folks. I've worked in prisons, in jails, and at least in this country, anywhere from 70 to 80% of the people that are in prisons are there because of drugs and alcohol, or what they do on drugs, or what we do on drugs and alcohol, right?
Yeah.
And so I've had the good fortune. I started a meeting in a minimum security prison in 1987 in Oregon. And when I went down to visit somebody last year, I found out the meeting is still going, which is awesome. It's always endearing and warming to know that maybe you can start something that other people can carry on and move forward with.
Yeah. No, totally. Wow. So as well, so this has been more than 42 years in long-term recovery. So congratulations, by the way. And from what I've read, I just want to say before we do go any further,
Yes, sir.
I'm proud of you. I really am. From what I've read today, I sat there and I looked at it all and I was like, this man has been on one hell of a journey. He has gone from basically the bottom of a bottle, if you will, to changing lives.
Yeah.
A lot of
And
people,
that's,
yeah, a lot of
sorry,
people
go
don't
ahead.
do that. A lot of people don't do that. They continue with it, you know?
Well, I get, and the number is a big number, but it's really important to me to stay humble and to be coachable and teachable, right? I always look for something new that I can learn. And I can learn from somebody with, I've got 42 years, but I can learn from somebody with 42 days. Um, and, every year when I get my coin, it's a nice deal. I get a lot of thanks and praise, but the question you always get asked at meetings is, how'd you do it? Right. And I always want to qualify that. It should be, how did we do it? Right. Because
Yeah,
very few of us can do this alone. I certainly didn't. Right. I'm here because of the love, kindness, and support of others, and had people love me when I wasn't very lovable and hold me up when I couldn't do it myself. Right.
yeah,
So pardon me, I get a little emotional when I talk about that. Even after all this time, I still get emotional
that's
about
fine.
the people who helped save my life.
Mm.
And of course, I think it's important for me to do service and to reach out, and it's never felt like an obligation,
Mm.
even though the common phrase in recovery is what was so freely given to us, right? There's not an expectation that I pass it on, but it is a part of my recovery. And if I could talk about that just for a minute, Wayne, would that
Of
work?
course, absolutely. Just remember that this show is all about emotion. It is a personal story, and that's what matters. So you
Okay.
go ahead.
So I think one of the ways the service part works in my recovery is in the 12 step, both NA and AA, is having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. We carry the message to the still suffering addict or alcoholic and practice these principles in all our affairs. So the spiritual experience is very personal, very intimate. It's different for everybody. But I think one of the things that happens if we have a transcendent experience, and that can be anything. It can be hearing your baby daughter cry for the first time as you hold her, seeing the sun come up over the ocean or over the mountains for the first time. These can all be very profound, transcendent experiences. And while important, and in many cases can be life-changing, they can also be fleeting if I'm not reinforcing them, right? So I think what AA did back in the 30s was brilliant. They operationalized a spiritual experience by asking us to do service work. And like I said, it never feels like an obligation to me. It is just a part of my recovery. And there's a real famous saying, we can only keep what we have by giving it away. And that is the absolute truth, I think, about how recovery works. By extending my hand, I am giving back what was given to me, but also gets me out of my head a little bit.
Yeah.
If my hand's extended, I'm thinking, what can I do? What do you need from me? How can I help? And, this morning before we did this interview, I did a little bit of that. But it's through friendships and relationships. And, I'll say that the tables, both fellowships that I attend, is the only place I can go into. And I always tell people, if you're going to do this, plan on being at the meeting 45 minutes after it's over. I can walk in and go, hold my hand up and go, look, I'm in a little bit of trouble. And before the meeting's even over, I've got people who don't know me, don't know my background, shoving phone numbers in my face, saying, call me, let us know what can we do. And those conversations that go out in the parking lot are some of the most impactful conversations that I've ever been a part of. So if I can tell a story about a time, this would have been about 23 years ago. My daughter bought me a trip to go to Ireland, and I had a great week. And I thought, how cool would it be to catch a meeting in Ireland, right? And so back then, remember the dial-ups, right? It sounded like a robot being tortured, right? So I looked up a meeting and I went to the meeting, and it was kind of tough because it was at night, and the signs are on the buildings. They're not on the corners like they are here, right? And my eyesight at night isn't all that great, but I did find it. And what I found was an old bombed out building. There hadn't been anybody in there in years. So I got back to the room and I called the hotline, and she apologized up and down and said, there hasn't been a meeting there for years. We really need to take this off the schedule. And I said, this is like 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. And I said, are there any other meetings in town tonight? And she goes, they're not. And what she said next has really impacted me, and I'll carry this story with me to the end of my days. She said, are you okay? Do you need me to send somebody over to the room? Will you be okay? And I said, no, I'm fine. I just wanted to attend a meeting, but here I am in another country with an odd accent, right? And she was so thoughtful and kind and wanted to make sure I was okay that she was going to send somebody over to the room. Um, and to me, that is worldwide what happens at these meetings. Um, the other thing that happens that I think is really important is a leveling of hierarchies, status, and class, right? Because you can have an executive, a banker, business executive sitting next to somebody who maybe spent the night in a shelter. But around those tables, we're all addicts, we're all alcoholics. Status and class is left at the door. And it's one of the things, and it isn't, doesn't always work that way, but it's the way it's supposed to work. And in most of the meetings I've been to, that's the way it works.
Mm.
And I think it's a really important um, function of how both fellowships work around the tables, if that makes sense, my friend.
Absolutely. No, it really does. And you've also been given several awards for your non-fiction writing during college.
Yes, I did. I had never really written much before,
Mm.
and essentially, I one of the things I was able to do was spend a lot of time in boxing gyms. I'll just get this out of the way right away. I was pretty average. Uh, I would say I would take that as a compliment if somebody called me an average club fighter.
Yeah.
Um, but those of us who can't do it, a lot of times we become okay coaches,
Mm.
right? And I'm a pretty good coach, I think. Um, but essentially, it was a love letter to one of my coaches, and I talked about what he did for us. Some of the things he instilled in us as far as delayed gratification, um, discipline, um, I know it sounds odd, but anger management, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're in a boxing ring and I'm angry, and Wayne, you and I, if we're working together, and I get upset because I can't get past your jab, boy, it's all over. You can't play chess if you're not focused, right? If
That's
you're
true.
emotional.
True.
And so these lessons I learned about kindness and giving of time, I learned from boxing gyms and the coaches I was with. And so I think probably the reason it wasn't the best written essay, but I think probably the reason I got the awards for it was because it was so unique. There isn't a lot of folks that are going to write a love letter about their coach or to their coach, and that's what this really was. Um, so I will, if I can share another moment.
Yeah.
So that night my daughter was born, and I ended up in a holding cell. The last probably 20 years, March 29th, I always give her a call. And I always apologize about not being there. And she's lovely. She is funny and smart. She always replies and says, Dad, I really don't remember. It's funny. And I used to say I'm sorry, but over the last few years, I've kind of changed that call. I wish her a happy birthday, and I say thank you. Thank you for coming into this world and teaching me so many wonderful lessons when it was just the two of us. I learned so much from her. And it's about being grateful and having gratitude in my life for what I have. And I am so grateful for this precious little girl. She's not a little girl anymore. She's in her early 40s, which kind of gives an indication of how old I am. But I think over time, how we see the world changes if we allow it, right? And I've gone from wanting to apologize to my daughter for not being there when she was born to saying thank you for how you changed my life. And that really was the moment that changed my life.
I agree. I agree. I could say that about my son as well. Obviously, I was never perfect, but as soon as my son came about, things I saw was it needed to change, and I changed because of that. my son's a reason like your daughter's your reason as well. So yeah, I can relate to that.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, tell me about the books that you've got out currently.
So we don't have any of them on the market just yet, but I
Okay.
wrote Walk With Me as sponsorship in the 21st century.
Hmm.
Um, the big book is, and the books that we're working out of are almost 100 years old.
Right.
And all I wanted to do was just update it a little bit. And so sponsors are not counselors, and I don't want to turn them into counselors, but
Hmm.
I was hoping that I could provide something that would be trauma informed
Yeah.
and that sponsors could be trauma informed, that they're not here to solve any or heal anybody's trauma, but hopefully we won't make it worse,
Yeah.
right? By being kind and gentle. And kind of my big thing with recovery is wrote a book on the neuroscience of addiction, and the changes that happen in the brain. And the reason this is important to me is in the 60s and 70s, if somebody was called an alcoholic, certainly an addict, but an alcoholic, it was almost a slur,
Yeah.
right? They were belittled and made fun of on TV, and especially when this all started in the 30s and 40s. But even my experience as a child and a young man up into the early 80s, if alcoholism and addiction was considered a character flaw, a moral failing, you were weak, you were broken, why can't you just quit, right?
Hmm.
And it really is wiring in the brain. And what happens is basic survival instincts, food, water, shelter, sex, are all placed in a secondary position to the drugs or the alcohol.
Hmm.
So if you think about, if I can talk about an experiment that was done
Yeah,
not
sure.
too long ago, there was an experiment done where people who had not had water in almost 3 days were put in an MRI machine. And they played noises like waterfalls and showed them pictures of water with condensation and ice on them. 3 days or almost 3 days, you're right on the edge of getting in trouble, right, from being dehydrated. And what they found was in the MRI machine, relative to the brain, it wasn't the actual size, but like the size of a baseball, right? So the next set of experiments was somebody who hadn't eaten in 5 days, and they put them in the MRI machine, and they played noises of sizzling steaks and wafting. I'm thinking these are some cruel son of a guns, but what they found was brain activity compared to the water of the baseball was about the size of a basketball.
Yeah.
Now, the next thing they did was they took alcoholics and opiate addicts. There was no pictures. All they did was ask them one question. And the question they asked was, tell us about the first time you used, right? Now,
Yeah.
remember, three days of not having water came up with about the size of a baseball. Not eating for 5 days came up with about the size of a basketball. Just asking one question. No sense, no pictures, just asking the question, tell us about the first time you used. It was relative to the size of a professional baseball field. Just the brain activity, just asking that one question, right? So if you think about survival instinct of water and food, and then you just ask somebody a question, and let me give a little bit more context to this too. All of these people, the alcoholics and the opiate addicts, all had a year sober. They had been clean and sober for a year. And they had this kind of brain activity just from that one question. So when you think about, it's just a choice, right? But it's a choice that is overpowered by survival instincts. And this study has gotten a little bit of traction in the last few years. I think it's a brilliant study, and it shows how this disease is more than just a choice. So how do we help people to get started? I think the first thing we can do is the way we have always healed as a species is in communally, right? If somebody goes to a meeting, they might not agree with everything there, but the one thing that really works in the meeting is the people around the tables. You have people just starting, you have people who've been around for a while, then you have old geezers like me who have been around for a long time. And we all have our roles within that around the tables. I really believe that healing happens in community and connection. So there's an old saying in around the table, say you're only as sick as your secrets, right?
Yeah.
That if you let the sunlight in on some of this dark, scary stuff, it's not as dark and scary anymore. But I also think the other side of that is I'm as healthy as my connection, right? I'm as healthy as I am connected to my community. And there's a joke. I mean, some of the dark humor around the tables is fantastic. And there is an old joke about when one door closes, another door opens, but the hallway is, insert a bad word here, right? The hallway is a son of a gun.
Yeah.
But I also think that the opposite to that is recovery opens doors, and it's allowed me to be in rooms I could have never imagined I would have been in. I was a young man who was connected to a lot of violence, a lot of drug and alcohol use, and no real human connections. I mean, I was married, I had a child, but it didn't change until I sobered up. And I sobered up in community. I sobered up with help, and I sobered up with love. Like I said earlier, I had people love me when I wasn't very lovable.
Yeah.
And this is what we do in the program. We hold one another up. So that goes back to when one world ends, that is the transformation. This is that liminal in-between state that I talk about in rites of passages. So yeah, that's what I've got on that. And
no, that's
sorry, I'm kind of rambling a little bit.
No. This is good. I mean, when you say your book projects, so Walk With Me, let's get this right. So Walk With Me was sponsorship in the 21st century.
Yes, sir.
Okay. What about Greek Recovery? Have you got any of these in books, or are they just you're looking to get them into book? Or
yeah, we have them set up and printed out, and the Greek Recovery it's unique, and I've kind of looked at branching out on that. So one of the things we've always done as a species is tell stories.
Yeah.
Right. We've sat around campfires, we've cooked our meat, and as we cooked our meat, we made up stories about the movement of the stars and the sun, the herds, and you know, I can come into a room when I do a group and I can list facts and figures and talk about stuff. Maybe the folks in the room will remember it, but maybe they won't. But what they'll remember, we can always remember a well-told story, right?
Yeah.
And this is something we've done for a long time. And with Greek Recovery, what I wanted to do is tell the old stories again. So what I did is I juxtaposed a modern parable against a Greek myth. So chapter 1 is about a young man who's struggling. Day 1, again, he's struggling with relapse. He goes through the same process over and over and over. Well, I juxtapose that with the Greek myth of Cepheus, who was set to roll a boulder up the hill for betraying the gods, cheating death, if you will. And that was his punishment, but he kept doing it. He kept rolling. He wasn't going to give up. And so I used 12 Greek myths and modern parables. And then I got to the end and realized, talking about 12 myths and 12 trials, I hadn't done Hercules yet. So we threw a bonus one in, and which didn't make much sense. I missed Hercules. How could I not have Hercules in there? And I also put, we went through the whole myth. So right now I'm working on a project I want to do. So for the 12 steps of AA and NA,
Yeah.
there's 12 principles. And some of those principles are courage and honor, loyalty, brotherhood, and so on. And I thought, what a perfect match for the Arthurian legend,
Mm.
right? And so that is probably the next project I'm going to be working on with that. And again, I think it's about telling stories.
Yeah.
Um, and it's what we do as a species. It's how we develop culture, right? Through storytelling. Um, so I've got a lot more projects in the work. I'm doing some work right now. I'm just fascinated with the collaboration between a Nobel Prize winner of physics, I believe it was 1945, Wolfgang Pauli and Carl Jung.
Mm.
And they had like a 20-year correspondence where they were saying that psyche and material, or the way they actually talked about it was subconscious and upconscious, and the conscious, right? Unconscious and
Yeah.
conscious
Yeah.
are the same sides of the coin of waves and particles, right? And they were trying to work out without the science and the the MRIs and everything that the materials we have now, intuited that they were the same side or different sides of the same coin, and trying to figure out a unified field. So I'm just really fascinated with that. And this was um, from the 30s up through the 50s.
So tell me about a mythic journey through addiction and redemption.
So thank you for asking. It's one of the things I was really thrilled about doing is what we do is we pair a modern parable of recovery against a classic myth from Greek mythology. So chapter one starts with a young man who has relapsed and is struggling, but keeps coming back, and he's trying, right? And I paired that with the classic myth, Greek myth of Sisyphus, who was left to have to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, right? And they kind of paralleled a little bit. And one of the things that's attractive to me about this is it's one of the things we've always done as a species, right? We tell stories. It's how we develop culture. It's how we made sense of the movements of the stars and the sun, the moon, the herds, sitting around a campfire, cooking our meals, right? So I'm kind of on a track with that a little bit. I have another book that I'm working on right now where taking the AA principles for each step. Um, so loyalty, brotherhood, courage, and I'm pairing them with the Arthurian myth, maybe in the same fashion that I did with Greek recovery, mythic tales.
Yeah.
So I think, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I said yes. No, I was agreeing.
Um, and I think stories are something that we've always done. Um, and when I speak at a meeting, I usually spend maybe a quarter of the time just telling stories. Um, and it's one of the things that we try to do with the app, if I can mention that.
Of course you can.
RecoverIQ.app. It's kind of a neuroscience based approach to recovery. As I mentioned earlier, one of my big things that I focus on is addiction is not a character flaw or moral failing, right? It's wiring. And if we understand what the wiring is and we understand how to fix that, small patterns repeated daily are going to rewire your brain, right? And change that hierarchy that I talked about earlier with survival instincts. And so we're doing some really interesting stuff. We have books, we have workbooks. I have hundreds and hundreds of daily reflections workbooks, and it's a little bit of a different approach. I
Yeah.
have a workbook on the feminine divine, the goddess workbook. Again, just telling stories from myth and comparing them to what recovery is like today. And so we're just getting going with that. And
Yeah.
this is what I'll be doing in my retirement, and I'm excited.
I love
I
that.
can't wait.
Yeah. So you've got a 14-week foundational course designed to support early recovery. Is that correct?
I do. And it's one of the biggest projects I did. I think it's somewhere between 340 and 360 pages. And we look at recovery a little bit different from traditional models. I talk about community a lot. I have a whole section on intimacy in recovery. And intimacy is not just about physical intimacy, right? It's about relationships, and which is so important in recovery, establishing those relationships, learning how to have a real friendship, learning how to give without expectation of return, how to be a good friend. These are so important. But I also do a pyramid of intimacy where I juxtapose it against Maslow's pyramid hierarchy of needs, right? And it's similar in that the basic traits for a good relationship start at the bottom with trust, and it works our way up. One of the things I used to do when I did a men's group, and I'd say, okay, we're going to talk about intimacy today, right? And I'd hear, oh God, right? And so I'd say, give me a list of 30 of the most important traits that you think a successful relationship need. And by the end of it, these guys were really invested. I mean, they were getting loud, getting up off their chairs. It was so much fun. And because one of the things I always talked about, if you have loyalty, honor, trust, you have all of these selflessness, all these things in a relationship, and you're going to build one on top of the other. When you get to the top, how could the physical intimacy not be an out of body or out of world experience, right? Because you built that relationship, and it was always one of my favorite groups. I love doing it for the men's group. And one of the things I talked about, it seems old timey to talk about courtship, right? And 100 years ago, 150 years ago, we had actual courtships where you spent time with somebody, and you got to know them as a person, right? And before any physical thing came into effect, I'm trying to be polite here about this, but I think it's almost the opposite now, right? We don't really know somebody before we get physically intimate with them. So I don't want to get too far off, but this is really important in recovery, because I think jumping into relationships and being physically intimate right away is just another form of distraction, where I don't have to focus on some of the difficult, challenging things I have to work on in my life in early recovery, right? So, yeah, one of the, if I could jump tracks here just a little bit, Wayne, would that be okay?
Well, of course.
I want to talk real quick about it's a story I really like. And if there's anybody listening who's struggling, who's new, you're not broken. It's just your wiring needs to change, right? And there is hope. Look, I'll just say this flat out. I'm no smarter. I don't have no wisdom or insight than anybody else. I'm just old, right? And I learned from some really smart people. Keep coming back, connect to your community, connect to the people that have been there, right? This is where the magic happens. Now, there's some things maybe you don't agree with. That's okay. What matters is the people sitting around that table. And usually it's around a round table, right? Again, like I talked about earlier, status, hierarchy, and class are usually left at the doors. And those are the best meetings, right? So if I can talk about one of my favorite stories about broken and being repaired.
Of course.
Japanese pottery. Wayne, are you familiar with Kinjinsi? If I'm saying it wrong, I know I'm saying it wrong, but if you understand, contingency.
Oh, yes. I've heard of that.
Yeah. And it's brilliant. Because what they do is a pottery that has been broken, let's say it's fallen off a shelf. And what they do, they'll take gold, silver, and platinum, and they'll layer it, and they'll put the pottery back together with the scars, right? You can see where it was broken, but it's beautiful with the gold and the silver. And that pottery is actually worth more money than it is before it was broken, right? The repaired pot is worth more. I think that's a perfect metaphor for recovery, because as we go through recovery, we learn and we grow. And recovery is about growth. It's about what I've learned, what I need to do to be comfortable in my own skin. I mean, that's why many of us used, right? Because we're uncomfortable either in social situations or in our own skin. So the broken pottery metaphor really works, because you're worth more than you know, right? And you have value and you're important. Go to meetings, find people that matter. Find people. I always gravitate towards folks. If I hear something I like, that's where I go, and that's where I'm listening. I'm pulling up a chair, right? I'm sitting right next to them. And don't lose hope, my friends. Hope is probably the most important thing that we can hang on to, any of us. And again, I don't know, I don't have all the answers, but I know what I needed to do to improve my life, to move past my addictions. And it's different for everybody, right? There's no one size fits all. So what works for me is not necessarily going to work for everybody. But I think that's all I got, my friend.
That's fine.
Unless you had a question for me, my friend.
Honestly, well, I mean, I know that you're obviously going to be working on a series. You publish your essays on Medium and Substack. You've got, many book projects going as well. I mean, if you want to talk about them, by all means. But if you think that you've covered that, I'm very much happy.
Okay. Yeah, I can mention that real quick. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, mate.
So I have a publication that got published, one of my pieces on ritual and how it compares to modern recovery and AA Agnostica. They've been around a long while, good outfit, and I publish articles daily in both medium.com and Substack. Kind of a sampling of some of the work that we've done. And yeah. Sorry, apologies.
That's it. Yeah, no, I mean, to be honest with you, I think that your brain just saying, you know what, I have said everything. And to be honest with you, sitting here, I think you actually have. I mean, it's great, what you've been saying, and what I want to say to you as well, if it's okay with you. There's something that I want to take away from this interview in terms of promoting the podcast as well. The line that you used, "You're not broken, you just need to rewire." I want to use that to get listeners to listen to this podcast, if that's okay with you.
Perfect,
yeah,
my friend.
Brilliant. Are you okay for me to put this video on YouTube as well, with showing yourself, if you're happy with that?
That would be wonderful.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Okay. Right. I think we got something here. And, as well, if your 14-week foundational course can help other people as well, I'm sure it will. As you said, it's not meant for everyone. But the way I see it is, if someone is in a situation like you were before, then why not give that a go? If it works, that is the icing on the cake. If it doesn't work, it doesn't mean give up. It means that there is always going to be something out there for you to get back to who you were before.
Absolutely. And Wayne, can I add one more thing?
Of course, my friend.
Okay. when it comes to relapse, a lot of times supervisory folks in Department of Corrections and courts see recovery going from here up in a straight line, right? Recovery doesn't work that way. So they see the straight line. The way recovery works, at least in my experience, and again, I don't know everything, but in my experience, what happens is, let's say 3-4 months in, you're doing okay, and there is some really significant challenge or a big loss, right? And you go back out for a couple of days. Now, you're going to drop below that straight line. Now, at that point, make a decision to come back. What I always ask people is after their first relapse, I don't wag my finger at them. I don't say, what were you thinking? First question I always ask is, what'd you learn? Right? Because if we've learned something, in that is growth, right? That is where growth and change happens. And what happens, here's that line, you actually go above that line because you're taking knowledge and experience and wisdom and insight with you, right?
Yeah.
And so you move along that line. Let's say you're 9 months in and you have another difficult experience of a relationship breakup, a family member, you grief and loss, whatever it is, but you don't relapse. So what were the tools that you used to keep from relapsing? You're actually moving up more. So the challenges is where growth happens, and we actually improve and get better learning how to face these challenges the way we always did, right? Maladaptive coping mechanisms, getting loaded, getting blasted, right? It makes it go away for a little bit, but it's not permanent. And we often feel worse the next day, right? So I would say anybody watching this is just falling down. What'd you learn? What was your takeaway, right? That is where growth happens. That's where we get better. That's where we get healthy, right? Absolutely. That's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me add that way.
That's all right. And I know that it's obviously different from what I'm going to say, but from what you said, in terms of, your addiction, I had an addiction as well. And obviously I know smoking is different to alcohol. But you've got to want to.
Yes.
There's and when you say about relapse, and unfortunately relapses, they're there. They, in a way, meant to be broken, but not meant to be broken. It's understanding it. It's really wanting you to test yourself. It's wanting you to feel that need to want to make change.
So, Wayne, can I give you a thought on,
of course, mate.
on when you have a craving to pick up light up, right? I don't know if you're familiar with any sort of breathing exercises.
Well, with my anxiety, I'm sure probably. But just to let you know, I don't have any cravings anymore.
Oh, good.
They're gone.
Fantastic.
But as what I was saying to you is that I did go through a stage of relapsing. I was puffing away on the e-cigarettes. But I tell you a story, and what really made me jack it in, and here's my want to have wanted to give up. I nearly died in the bathroom, and I didn't tell my partner this. I nearly died in the bathroom by puffing away on an e-cigarette. I wanted to feel that hit so bad. I took the biggest drag and I was choking. I felt my lungs wanting to collapse and give up. And I've got severe asthma. I now take injections for that. And you're making me well up here, but it's the want. It's the wanting to give up, and it's the want to make change is the most important thing to recognize. And I've just prayed to God that somebody recognizes that before it is too late.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. What a story. It reminds me of when you talk about the want, Wayne, Viktor Frankl, who said, the man who has his why can figure out any how. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that really applies to the want. If you have the want to, you'll find a way, right? You'll figure out a way. Well, I'm glad you're okay, Wayne. I'm glad.
Oh, absolutely. I'm doing
Wow.
fitness. I'm getting myself to where I want to be. I started fitness as well, 3 days ago. So this would be my fourth day into it. And I'm really making change because I want to make
Excellent.
change.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Wayne, and you've been so kind and generous.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it, and thank you. Um, just you've got a wonderful setup. You just wonderful organization here, and
I appreciate that, my friend.
yeah, and you've been very helpful, and thank you. Like I said, so generous with kind of helping me through this a little bit. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And I'll be there as well after this as well. I'll drop you an email and let you know my thoughts of what we could do next.
Okay,
All
that
right, my
that
friend.
would be wonderful. You let me know, and if you can, if you have a topic,
Hmm.
it's one of the things that being an old guy with a lot of experience, I could walk into a group room and say, "What's the biggest challenge somebody has today?" And we could talk for 2 hours on it.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, if you can think of a topic that I can help with and
Yeah.
help somebody with, please let me know.
I will do. Don't you worry about that.
All
You
right.
take care, my friend, and we'll talk soon.
It's been a pleasure, my friend. Hope to see you soon.
You too, my friend. All the best.
All right. Bye bye.
Welcome to the Right Boss Podcast, the show where the spotlight goes beyond fame and success.
We sit down with icons, celebrities, rising talents, and business leaders from across the globe to uncover the stories you don't usually hear.
This isn't just about careers or achievements. It's about the personal journey, the struggles, the lessons, and the moments that shaped who they are today.
This is the Right Buzz Podcast.
Hey, Patrick, welcome to the Right Buzz Podcast. And I've been busy just reading, the amazing things that is going on with you. And it's going to be really interesting to find out a lot about what you've been up to from the start of your journey, how you got to the start of your journey. But first of all, before we do start, tell us a little bit about yourself, my friend.